And thank you everybody for tuning in. So as Ross says, I'm going to speak for 20 minutes or so, and then we'll have some questions. So the first thing to note, when I advertised this, people got confused. Yes, this is a picture of the King's Knot or the cup and saucer. But it's the key element of the Royal Park. The Royal Park is the entirety, and the Royal Park at various times has included the King's Knot, the King's Park, i.e. the golf course, the King's Park, i.e. the residential area, and Gowan Hill. So they're all different pieces. So I'm going to go through what makes this royal landscape unique, and precisely what size it is and what are the key features. So slide 2, please, Ross. So William the Lion founded the Royal Park in the late 12th century. The 12th century features a lot for Stirling. It's a very important century. 1110, Alexander I founds a chapel in Stirling Castle. He dies in Stirling Castle. His brother, David I, of course, founds the bar status, 1124, founds Cambus Kenneth Abbey, founds the high school. All of these things happen in the 12th century. And what we're looking at is the kings of Alapa, of Scotland, are moving to the south. Stirling was always at the gateway, was never really part of Scotland, was always something different, and has a separate identity that only begins to kind of merge with the broader Scotland through the 12th century. I mean, just slightly after this, 1180, Scotland's first national court system is founded, or national system of assizes is founded in Stirling. So Stirling is the bridge that unifies what we might call Pickland and Dalriada, and then north of the Forth, and then south of the Forth, the English lands of Lothian and the old British kingdom of Strathclyde. So Stirling knits all of these various bits and pieces together, which is why there's so much investment. And just another wee aside, of course, Edgar, Alexander, David I are all the children of Malcolm III. Malcolm III is the Malcolm from Macbeth, and he is the chap that defeats Macbeth in battle. And as far as I tell, he is the only Scottish king to have been responsible for the deaths of both of his immediate predecessors. So Macbeth was a legitimate and good king of Scotland. Macbeth's stepson, Lullach, was also a king of Scotland. And for good measure, Malcolm also ordered the execution of Lullach's son, whose name I've actually forgotten. There we go, I've forgotten Lullach's son. Anyway, a very bloody individual. He marries 2 women, a Viking princess, and then latterly St. Margaret, who becomes our only royal saint. And this marks a key moment of transition for Scotland. All of his children have English or classical or biblical names. They don't have Gaelic names anymore. This happens. So he is expanding his kingdom and changing its nature. And it's the first time we might say that we're looking at a non-Scottish identity, the monarchs of Scotland. Anyway, leave that aside. We might come back to that. Slide, the next slide, please, Ross. So just some boundaries. So the map to the top left with the red dotted line shows the current extent of the Royal Park. And this is actually still land that's owned by the Crown, it's leased to, it was transferred to Historic Scotland. Historic Scotland leased it to Stirling Council, and then we have in turn leased it to various people, so the golf course. The map on the bottom right marks Gowan Hill and what we call King's Park, the residential area. There was a transfer of land, so the residential area of King's Park was was Crown land prior to 1500, and around 1500 it swapped for Gowan Hill, which then became part of the Royal Park. This happened under James IV. And the reason it happened is because improvements in artillery meant you could fire upon Stirling. So the Crown wanted to have the land in order to control it. Next slide, please, Ross. What we have here is a late 16th century map. This, I think, from memory is Pont, or it might be Blow. I can never quite remember the two when I look at them. And what you've got is Stirling, and you've got the castle, and you've got the park around the castle. This is a good map for a couple of things. You can see the bridge over the Forth. You can see the mill. This is the bridge mill, which was there when Wallace was there. You can see the very, very elaborate gateway constructed by James IV. The rumps of those towers are still there on the castle. You can see the barrayette, the town gateway is there, and you can obviously see the Church of the Holy Rood in the town. Not an accurate map, but it has some very interesting details. So next slide, please, Ross. This is not a military map from the early 19th century, and I apologise for the quality of this. A copy has been on display in the Smith, which is the bigger slide, but it doesn't photograph very well. And I've got another copy, but it's under glass, and I struggle to photocopy it. So the big image is the overall map, which shows the castle, and it shows the area of the golf course and the municipal park. And the detail when you get it, it shows that the entire area is covered in rig and furrow. It also shows the medieval boundary of the park, which is the line in red, marked boundary on the little insert at the bottom right. And for those that have walked around from the tennis courts to the homesteads, you'll know that the wall there is 2 to 3 metres high, and is in effect a deer dike. It's to stop deer jumping over the wall. Right. Now, this, of course, it should be said, while we call this the park, this is strictly speaking the old park. There is also a new park. So if we get the next slide, please, Ross. Now, the new park around the castle is established in the 13th century, probably Alexander III. He's the chap that falls off the cliff at Kinghorn, plunging the kingdom into chaos and leading to the Wars of Independence. There's obviously a new park farm, which many of you will know. There is also the only surviving feature of the new park, really, is Coxet Hill, which is where Culton Hove is. And you can see a cruciform wood in the middle of that. And Coxet Hill is a corruption of cock-shot wood. And the cock-shot wood is a hunting wood. And what you do is you put nets along one side of the wood, and you get beaters, and the beaters chase or scare game birds into the net where they're caught. This rapidly fell out of use in the 14th century. Robert the Bruce transfers the land in a charter. The first mention of the wood is a charter by Robert the Bruce. But famously, of course, this is the likely location of the camp for the small folk, or the Scottish camp on day one of the Battle of Bannockburn. Certainly I prefer this to Gillies Hill. Anyway, we won't talk very much more about the new park. Next slide, please, Ross. Now, this is the walked round the kind of lower walk from the tennis courts round to the homesteads. This is this wall, and it's a very impressive wall. The boundary is very sinuous. It's worth looking again at this. It's obviously moving to avoid things within the park and avoid things outside the park. Now, it has a very, very conspicuous kind of top. The wall is comprised of very, very large capstones. The other thing at this point is we have Coney Hill to the outside of the park, and it has been suggested that Coney Hill may be an earlier version, an earlier element of the Royal Park that comes kind of lost when the wall changes, and a Coney Park is a reference to a rabbit farm. Now, the interesting thing about this wall here is that it changes its character. It halves its size to show the other side of the homesteads. If we get the next slide, please, Ross. Now, I do apologise for this slide. It is rather blurry. The red object in the middle is a building that is on the same line as the wall. This building roughly coincides with the start of the homesteads. And what happens is the wall changes character to either side of this building. And I suspect what this means is that the building was there when this wall was built. So quite how old this building originally was. It's called, a cotter. It's called a cotter's building. And a cotter is a slightly derogatory term for a kind of a low tenant. Anyway, it's the cotter's house in the park. Now, if we get the next slide, please. We were lucky enough to get to dig either side of where I think this building was, in someone's back garden. And what you can do, what you see here is that the slide to the right is the standard wall, and you will see that the foundations of that wall are about 1 metre deep, and you can see those very, very large capstones. Then to the left, the next hole, you can see that there are literally no foundations. You see the kind of round stones that are the round stones at the top of the pole there, the scale pole. That's the foundation. So the wall has literally no foundations. I think that the cotter's house is in between these two pits. I think that the wall changes its character either side of that, as I've said. And what you're looking at is less stone is used on one side of the house than the other, i.e. the wall becomes cheaper. And just to make this point, you are further away from the point of inspection. So I think that either the contractors ran out of money or the contractors were pocketing the difference. They were charging for a 2 metre wall, but were actually building a 1.8 metre wall. But it looked like a 2 metre wall if you weren't paying close enough attention. Anyway, next slide, please, Ross. Now, another of the surviving features of the Royal Park is the fish pond. Now, this is obviously the golf course, and I know many of the golfers complain that a large chunk near the clubhouse floods. That's because that's the pond, the Royal Pond. Now, you will be able to see from this picture that it's got rig and furrow over the top of it. And this is the rig and furrow that was on the early 19th century ordnance map I showed you earlier, the military map. And this proves that the pond went out of use prior to the transfer of the land to agriculture, and then they let it drain and they filled it in and they ploughed it. So if we get the next slide, please. Now, this is as an analysis of LiDAR survey that was undertaken by Stephen Digney on behalf of the Royal Commission. It shows you the dark blue is the pond, and the clubhouse is to the top of the pond. You can see a red bar between two areas of blue. We'll come back to that, but that's probably a dam. So this is a 15th century artificial fish pond. There are references in the accounts to nets and various other things happening to this. So we know it's a feature of the Royal Park. If we get the next slide, Ross, please. It's likely that the pond was fed by rainwater, and here is Stephen's proposed direction of flow. And you can see the clubhouse here, you can see Queen's Road, you can see the rig and furrow, lots of nice detail here. And if anybody wants this report, it is available online, but I quite happily direct you to it. And of course, this was built prior to the transfer of the Kings Park residential area, the boundary of which is Queen's Road for Gowan Hill. But a very interesting set of features here, and still much work to be done on this particular element. Next slide, please. One of the things that happened with the transfer of Kings Park residential area for Gowan Hill is that the original jousting ground was lost. This is the original jousting ground used by James I, James II, not James III. Interestingly enough, he never really was into jousting, is Victoria Square in Kings Park. This, under James IV, transferred to what we call the butt field. So the butt field for archery butts, butt practice next to the King's Knot, the other side of the butt well. And that flat area there was used for jousting. James V commissioned John Bogg in 1561 to build a passage or a road from the castle down to the jousting ground. You can see a detail of a map showing the road. The road survives on the ground it's just after the Greasy Gate, and the picture on the left shows the surface of the road, which we uncovered during upgrades to the lower back walk. And you can actually see a small gate through that dike. In fact, you can see where the road runs in a couple of places. Certainly it survives under the road. You can see the slope from the Greasy Gate, but if you actually pay attention to the houses between the butt field and the fire station, you can actually see the medieval road runs between those houses, and there's a gap in the wall. It's very, very clear. So, jolly exciting. Right, next slide, please. And we return to the King's Knot and the Queen's Knot. Now, the King's Knot, traditionally, this is the key feature of the Royal Park. There has always been something here. Sorry about that. Someone was trying to phone me. It was tricky if you've got your phone on. So the King's Knot is built on an older feature. There has probably always been a garden here. You have poetry. So David Lindsay talks about a table royal here. John Barber, Barber's Bruce, talks about the round table here. They link some kind of feature in the Royal Park under the castle, probably under the King's Knot, to Arthurian myth and legend. This forms a recurrent theme in the jousting matches. So, for example, James II's jousting match has an Arthurian theme, and this Arthurian theme first emerges in David II's reign in the late 14th century. And this is used as a bit of a propaganda element, but the name Snowdon is linked to Arthurian myth and means Stirling. So the King's Knot is an elaborate garden. It is probably the best preserved garden of its in Britain. Absolutely incredible. Very, very elaborate garden. Right, we're going to move on to another slide, please, or the next one. Now, this is another feature of the Royal Park. This is the Roman stone on Gowan Hill. Now, this is an abbreviated Latin inscription, and you can see the translation there. If you peer, it's a little too tight, but Vexialito cohors tu alias legio talia. Now, this purports to be an inscription about troop movements, but the Latin is bad. So this is most likely to be a 17th century fake. Now, the question is, was this done as an element of the park, or was it done something later? I'd like to think it was an element of the Royal Park. I suddenly remembered, the phone call interrupted me, that the King's Knot was constructed for the coronation of Charles II. The garden had fallen into repair during James VI's reign. Of course, James VI became James I of England, so Stirling kind of fell back a little bit. Reinvention of the Royal Park, reinvestment in the Royal Park under Charles I's reign, not Charles. Charles I is one that's beheaded. Charles II restoration. I definitely mean Charles I. Sorry. But this is the last major royal investment in the Royal Park. Now, I think it's possible that the Roman stone is something similar. We may be looking at some kind kind of link or joke between the nascent British Empire, the colonies in America, and then drawing a comparison with the former Roman Empire. Not entirely clear, but it is the sort of thing people did in the 17th century. Moving on, right. Next slide, please, Ross. So a few things to note. There is actually far more to the park. It's an enormous area, so it's got a prehistory. So you all know about the Bronze Age cup marks there. There is, I found a Neolithic leaf-shaped arrowhead here. This was lost by a hunter some 6,000 years ago. What you won't know, you definitely won't know, is that the boggy area running round the King's Knot, which I've marked in blue, is actually a glacial runoff channel. So when the glaciers melted, the water flowed to the sea. Of course, the King's Knot sits on a raised beach 10,000 years ago. All of that was a sea. You can still see that raised beach. And the blue line is a stream eroded first by the glaciers and the melting of the glaciers, and then latterly simply as a course. There is peat there. The peat is Mesolithic, and just to one side of this, we also know that there is a small Mesolithic hunting camp. These are the first people in the area, hunter-gatherers, following herds of animals and or geese, etc., etc. And they would be on the shore, living off limpets, living off seaweed, because there is always something to eat in the sea. So absolutely fascinating. But this marks the oldest habitation in Stirling, in the Royal Park. Well, the oldest habitation in Stirling, absolutely, stop. Next slide, please, Ross. Now, bringing back to this LiDAR survey, which we showed you earlier on, lots and lots of, someone has asked me where the cut mark stone is. It is very tricky to point, but if you walk round tennis courts to the homesteads and you stick to the upper path, it is in the middle on the right. But if someone email me afterwards, I can send you the grid references. Anyway, this red arrow here pointing to a feature in the LiDAR survey shows a round knoll. That round knoll is very interesting. It was battered a bit when the council improved the paths, and the current tarmac path that leads you round the cliffs of the upper bit of the Royal Park battered this. So we have the next slide, please, Ross. And this we've been doing some small excavations of that knoll, and it's turned out to be a Roman Iron Age fort. The slide in front of you shows paving, and within the centre of the paving is a reused rotary quern, which is the stone with the black hole in it. So these are people that were an elite settlement, trading with the Romans in the area. There's Roman pottery from the site. Absolutely fantastic discovery. We may be digging there next in July. If the lockdown conditions are fully lifted. If not, it'll be 2021. So next slide, please, Ross. And back to the LiDAR survey. There's been a long tradition of racing around Stirling, and a regular race round Bridgehaugh, and that at the start of the 19th century transferred park, and you can see on the LiDAR survey the racetrack indicated by the red arrows. Get next slide, please, Ross. And here, here we are. Yes, next slide is up, and we have the red, green, and the blue, two different options. Now, if you remember, I spoke about the pond, the Park Loch, and the dam at one end of the Park Loch. The race course actually runs over that and utilises the dam, and this is where the path that runs from the play park down to the golf course, runs over the top of that. So the next time you walk there, have a look, and you'll see a very steep, narrow kind of path with slopes to the side that rises above the flooded area. So next slide, please, Ross. Well, ahead of the pathwork, ahead of the pathworks, we had a quick dig in here, and this shows you the surfaces of the racetrack, and you can see red and black lines going down. The red are resurfacing events for the racecourse, and the black is where the turf reforms. And there are 2 or 3 of these going down the hole. Quite interesting. We never found any evidence for the dam. Next slide, please, Ross. One of the odder features of the King's Park is the rifle range, which was at the western end of it, from Fallon and Crags there, shooting right across what's currently Homestead's, the Homestead's farm. And when we metal detected for the path there, next slide, please, Ross. We found a number of squashed lead projectiles that had actually bounced up. There was actually a complaint at the end of in the early 20th century that people going for a walk were actually hit by bullets, or certainly they were disturbed by bullets. The shooting range was closed. They made some improvements, and it was all supposed to be fine, except that some of the bullets that we found were dated to after improvement works, so it was clearly still a problem. Right. Next slide, please, Ross. Now, Stirling, from about 1640, becomes a military base, an active military garrison. The garrison increases in size. Towards the end of the 19th century, the Argyll and Sutherlands are formed, and they're based in Stirling. There are all sorts of interesting stories about the Argyll and Sutherlands. My pal Jim Roach did a lecture the other week about them, and there's all sorts of things going on there. Now, during this period, the Royal Park gets used as a mustering ground several occasions, and during World War I, not only is it in effect a military base, it's also a training ground. And the photograph here shows World War I practice trenches that were dug at the time. Now, it's likely that some of the individuals that trained here were involved, were destined to fight at Gallipoli. And certainly some of the people, the soldiers stationed in Stirling, they were billeted at Hayford Mills, actually were involved in the Gretna disaster, which is the worst disaster on any British railway. Lots of people died, including, rather sadly, some children without whose bodies were never recovered. We don't actually know who they were. It always struck me as a very sad little note about that. Anyway, one of the things that was associated, obviously, with these trenches, there was a camp here, so there should be tents, or lots and lots of tents. Get the next slide, please, Ross. And in again uncovered during the path upgrade works, we found a dump of World War I tent fittings. So these are copper and brass fixtures and fittings from straps. So these are the straps that you would use with the tent or some kind of baggage. And there were actually, I mean, there's about half a dozen here, fixtures and fittings, but actually they were all just dumped in what was a former quarry in the King's Park near the golf course and just left to rot. And they're actually an inch or two below the surface, but a remarkably tangible link to soldiers that fought in World War I. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, that was the final slide. A little bit longer than I anticipated, but that happens. Thank you very much. Hope you enjoyed that, and certainly have to answer any questions.
Thank you, Murray. Thank you very much, as always, for a very entertaining lecture. Lost the ability to unmute everybody at once, so unfortunately, I can't get everybody all thingy, but if I can ask everybody
no,
to
don't worry.
give a wee round of applause, everybody's face. Oh, thank you very much. So, as always, any questions, please put your hands up and we'll go around the room and we'll answer your questions one by one. Thank you. I see Colin there.
Hi, Murray. Is there any indication of how many deer were held in the park when it was first conceived?
No. I am. The number changes over time, and it's important to say that the park isn't always a deer park. Yes, at various times it's a deer park, but I seem to remember there is a review by John Harrison that discusses differing levels of stock in the deer in the deer park, and certain kings. There's no evidence that they deer in it. There's probably always some kind of small amount of deer, but not a huge amount. So I don't think we're looking at enormous numbers. I think we're looking at 20s and 30s, and I think this should be seen as a leisure activity. Deer hunting at various times is people flush the deer out, and the deer right towards the king or the party that's doing the hunting. And I think you're looking at the deer being taken down with spears and knives. So I think it's a small population of deer. Scottish kingship at this particular point is very peripatetic, generally peripatetic to the 18th and 19th centuries, mainly because no one place can afford to keep the king for any length of time. So you're moving around, A, to dispense justice, B, to make sure you keep your nobles on side, see what they're up to, but equally for the resources. So I don't think there's a huge herd of deer. And bear in mind there's royal woods round in Clackmannanshire, and there's James VI establishes a royal wood in Doon. And the one at Doon, you can still see the bank there, actually.
Yeah, and there's all the Glenfinglas stuff as well. There's lots of records of the king and royalty going and hunting up in Glenfinglas. So I was just wondering whether it was more like the 18th century idea of having deer there as being a sort of pretty decoration to the grounds.
No, I think you're looking at partly a food resource, partly a hunting resource. I mean, I haven't come across any references to people being prosecuted for kind of impacting the deer, but clearly there would be keepers in the wood who would be responsible for maintaining a certain amount of deer. If you've got a deer dike, it is presumably to deer, unless, of course, what you're looking at is just incompetence, and you're looking at someone saying, we need a deer dike, so we'll build a deer dike, or someone quoted for a deer dike, didn't actually build one. Because once you go around from the homesteads around to Raploch Fire Station, the dike is a metre and a half tall. It's not very big, it's not very well built, it's in quite a bad way. So I think we're looking at a resource, and we're looking at something for hunting in order to provide a nice bit of venison for the king's table. Someone had asked how old the dike was. We're not very certain. We think that this particular dike at its latest 16th or 17th century, but it's clearly on the 12th century route, and it might be replicating an older design.
Yeah, I mean, if it's a leap, then and you're chasing deer into an entrapment area, then you want the wall to be high where that entrapment area is, and maybe you don't care about it around the backside of the park where, you know,
Yes.
that's where you start off, but you finish up where the high wall is.
Yes, and to expand on that for other people, I think what you're talking about are some of the V-shaped dikes.
Yeah.
So you can actually funnel deer down to a killing point. My reading here is that you're looking at the park probably has lots of small copses of wood, and that you're looking to beat. Now, whether you're beating into a corner or whether you're beating down an avenue, whether there's temporary nets, clearly they're capable of erecting nets over a long period. Your Coxet Hill doesn't work without an awful lot of nets.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Colin.
Thank you very much, Colin, for that. I'll go there to Jim.
Hello, Murray. Just for a comparison.
Hi, Jim.
Hello. Between the Stirling Deer Park and the Falkland Deer Park, I actually worked on the Falkland Deer Park with the late Oliver O'Grady. The Deer Park at Falkland had a bank with a ditch, wooden palisade on the top, enclosing the deer. The size of the deer park was varied between 1,200 acres and 1,600 acres. And somebody asked about a herd. The size of the herd there was between 300 and 500 deer. And would you believe some of the deer from Falkland was actually transported down to your park at the Royal Park in Stirling. So there you are. It just goes to show that.
Very good. Where's that published, Jim? Do you know? If that ever, if those things ever got published?
I'll email you. It's a brochure that was produced with the LLLP in the Living Lomans project, because they provided for that sort of thing.
That's excellent. I'd like to see that, Jim. Yes, please.
Right.
I mean, as always, I should say for the people listening, I'm a prehistoric archaeologist, and you can't work in Stirling without learning about the medieval. So all this is still new to me. But thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
I know that kind of leads me on to my question, Murray, actually. It's maybe a bit off topic to what we've been talking about, but what actually made you wake up one morning and go, tonight, Matthew, I want to be an archaeologist?
That goes back to the, it wasn't really that at all. In the 80s, the argument was you just needed a degree in order to get a good job, and something like 10% of the population was getting a degree. So you would get a degree, then you would be a lawyer or a doctor, or you would change your subject in postgraduate. And when I started in '91, I just wanted a degree, and it just transpired that archaeology was an interesting degree. I thought I'll do something interesting, then I'll get a job, and it became clear that I could actually do archaeology as a job, which was quite a surprise. And it's university. It's just doing it in university. I mean, what archaeologists tend to say is it's the most fun you can have with your trousers on, but equally, they don't ever recommend that anyone ever does it, because we describe it as an expensive hobby.
No artist ever really, all artists suffer from their art.
Yeah, exactly.
So have we got any other questions around the room? Oh yeah, I've got David there. So yeah, if you can unmute yourself, David.
Hi. I have read, and I wish I could think where, some reference to a short but ornamental canal being built on the base of the cliff going parallel to the King's Knot at the time of James VI. And I don't know, I appreciate it's not your period, but if you come across anything about that, it didn't appear from looking at the LiDAR there was anything obvious.
Yeah, no, that I've read this. I think this comes. This is something that's picked up in some 18th century accounts. So Sibbald and a few of the others, they talk about. I think they're looking at the flooded stream that I mentioned, the line in blue on the slide, and they're extrapolating that to boats. And admittedly, if that was flooded, you could get a canoe or a small boat up and down. But I think this is a bit of wishful thinking. And equally, you'll remember that there is an ornamental boat produced for the baptism, the celebratory feast of James VI's son, the one who died, not first, Henry. I think he's Henry. And there are very, very elaborate mock celebrations. So James VI's baptism, there was a mock castle was built roughly where the esplanade was, and you can see reconstructions of that. So there are just occasionally enormous celebrations associated with royal births, royal baptisms, royal coronations, and it's just a way of pomp and circumstance. But this particular story is erroneous. But if you email me, I will send you Stephen Digney's definitive account of everything that is known about the King's Knot, and that story is discussed and dismissed in that account. Yes.
Great, thanks.
No problem.
Fantastic, thank you very much for that, David Murray. Are there any other questions, Tim? I see you there. Yes, yeah, that's you there, Tim.
Right. Hi, Murray.
Hi, Jim.
A number of years ago, I very wet doing the prep for the geophysics project, I think with Stephen.
Yes.
And one of the topics that came up was that Drip Road was in some way connected. It connected Kildene with the early medieval structure underneath the King's Knot, and it had something to do with dispensing justice. And the drip in Drip Road meant something. It's gone. I've forgotten. So drip meant something to do with justice.
All right.
Does that ring any bells?
Well, it doesn't, but it's easy enough to find out about that. Interestingly enough, one of the key experts on and what you're referring to is the possibility of a moot hill. So we've got the moot mound in oh goodness me, I've now forgotten, outside Perth where the Kings are crowned, Scone, and you've definitely got mounds. So you've got trees. So Dingwall, you've got trees in Shetland, you've got a thing on the Isle of Man. So you've definitely got justice being diminished from mounds. I think drip would be easy enough to find out. I don't have my Gaelic place name books here, but I can well imagine that Stephen would be correct. Would have picked up on something real. I just don't know it, but I will look that up. I was going to say, one of the experts on that, it was actually the late Ollie O'Grady, and his PhD, which is downloadable, is all about mounds through Scottish history. I have a copy of it somewhere, and I don't recall seeing very much about Stirling in that. PhD, but certainly drip. That's fascinating, actually. I could well imagine. Although, of course, you've got Drip Bridge. I always thought Drip Road was the road to Drip, rather than the road to the mound. But I will have a look into that.
I just, as a complete aside, I didn't know that Ollie O'Grady had died. It came as a real shock when it was called Ollie O'Grady.
Yeah, 2 or 3 weeks. I don't know. It was the last 2 weeks.
Yeah.
He had a sudden heart attack. Yeah. So a well-known and well-liked figure. Very nice guy. I didn't really know him personally, just academically, and he had certainly amassed a fair amount of publications. I think he had an obituary last week somewhere. But yes, sudden 39, an incredible tragedy. 2 children left behind. So I'm sure he'd be much missed.
Thank you very much, Murray, for all that. I think that's us there for
no
questions.
All, Ross, thank you.
Thank you all for coming along and joining us. And we look forward to seeing you next week.
Okay, that's brilliant. Thanks very much, Ross.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Bye.
Bye for now, everyone. Bye.